Good morning. Here I am. Good morning. Welcome to the Eno River Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. Located in Durham, North Carolina, we are located on the ancestral lands of the Eno, Shakori, Saxapaha, Sissipaha, and Lumbee people. Their descendants live here and in surrounding communities today. I'm Reverend Deborah Cayer, and whoever you are, wherever you are from, whatever your race, your gender, your native language, whomever you love, and wherever you are on your spiritual journey, welcome, welcome this morning. If you're new to this community, and especially if you're visiting with us today, I invite you to put your, just to say hello in the chat box, and you will get a warm ERUF welcome. And you'll also find a link there in the chat that will help you learn more about us and some of the things that are going on here. I also invite you to our Inquirers class on Sunday mornings at 9:30 on Zoom. The link for that class can be found on our homepage or in our weekly e-news. At ERUF, we love our kids, and we've got some wonderful children's classes this year at 9:30 on Sunday morning. This is in person, outdoors, masked, distance. The energy on campus this morning was wonderful. So check out our offerings on our website or contact our religious educator, Julia Tyler. We are meeting for all Sunday services, adult classes, groups, and programs, also online or outside right now, while the threat from the Delta variant is still so high. So check out our website or Friday e-news to find out about all of the great things that are going on for adults, including adult classes on Sunday mornings at 9:30. So a few new things. Starting today and continuing on Sunday after the service, our worship associates are going to host an online discussion. That will start at 12:15 for anyone who might like to reflect and respond with fellow members or with others. So you can find that link on our homepage under events, and it's also in e-news, and it will be on your screen at the end of the service. And then in 2 weeks, on Saturday, October 23rd at 4:30, we are going to have an outdoor, in-person pet blessing here on campus. So pets must be on a short leash or in a carrier. We, adults, will be, and children, any human people, will be masked and distanced. We are going to be outside. We will sing. We will hear some thoughts about pets and spirituality. And then we're going to hear from a couple of people about why they love their pets. We'll have a procession and blessing stations. All are welcome. Even if you don't have a pet, or if you don't think your pet would enjoy being here for that, you're still welcome. This is on Saturday, October 23rd at 4:30. So see e-news on the website for more information. And then finally, here is your weekly update on the 2,500 Hours of Love project. Drum roll! 1,935 hours have been pledged. We have less than 600 hours to meet our goal, and we could keep going beyond that if we had the ambition. And here's some really great news. 147 and a half hours have already been completed toward our goal. So that is just fantastic. This morning's service will be led by Reverend Jacqueline and Brett. Kate Lewis is our pianist. Other participants will introduce themselves or be listed on your screen this morning. And behind the scenes here this morning, Jenny Jolly is our tech person, and Jim Van Berth is our sound engineer, and Sean Trimble is also broadcasting with us this morning. So, welcome to you all. So let's center ourselves and just take a breath. And we're going to turn now to a ritual. We often mark important events with a rose. When we welcome babies and children into this community, we offer them a rose without thorns, which is our promise, our way of expressing our promise that we will watch over them and help them grow. When our kids graduate from high school and are heading out into the world, we have a ritual. We offer them a rose with thorns as a symbol that we believe that they're prepared for life's thornier moments. We give a rose to our new members when they join. And when a member dies, we float petals from a rose on the waters of life. So this morning, we are remembering several of our members who have died in recent months. And we light candles this morning for Gwen Griswold, who died on May 23rd. And Ross McKinney Sr., who died September 18th. Johan Madsen, who died September 26th. And Dave Buhler, who died around September 20th. We hold all of the light of their lives still in this community and in each of our hearts. And we continue our service this morning with the prelude.
We begin this morning's service with a prayer of place as we situate ourselves to honor these unceded ancestral lands of the Ino, the Saponi, Shakori, Sissipaha, and Lumbee peoples. Let us begin. Hush. This is a holy place, a sacred place where the visions dwell, where the dreaming began. Someone's God has stepped here, dwelt here, spoken here of life, of death, of holy things. As we come softly, walk softly, talk softly. Be mindful of the dreams. Hush. This is a holy place, a sacred place where the visions dwell, where the dreaming begins. This is a place where trees and bushes, grasses and ferns, deer and chipmunks, robins and bluebirds have lived and died for generations, where the young have been born, cared for, and nurtured. When death has overtaken life, age after age, hush. This is a holy place. A sacred place where the visions dwell, where dreaming begins. This red soil, colonized as North Carolina, is the land of the red man, is where the gods have lived, the gods of the Eno, the Saponi, Sissipaha, Shakori, Lumbee, and the African slave and the freedman, where our Unitarian Universalist ancestors made promises of love and kindness and broke their promises in deeply disappointing ways, where dreams turned into nightmares, yet where hope still kindles. Hush. This is a holy place, a sacred place where visions dwell, where the dreaming begins. This is a holy ground made holy by our presence, our love, our struggle. Come, let us walk softly. Let us stomp our feet. Let us shout. Let each utterance remind us of the dreams that live and the hope that is this place. Ashe.
We light our chalice this morning, beacon of our hope, the symbol of our Unitarian Universalist faith, a beacon that ever helps us find our way to love and truth, especially in troubling times. Our first hymn this morning is We Stand on Holy Ground. It is led by Pam Dillavore. The words will appear on your screen.
We stand on holy ground. We stand on holy ground. Wherever on this earth we stand on holy ground. Each land is sacred land. Each land is sacred land. Wherever on this earth we stand, each land is sacred land.
morning. I'm Julia Tyler, the Director of Religious Education here at the Eno River UU Fellowship. This October is the start of our new RE Religious Education year for children, youth, and families. Last Sunday was our first official Sunday back in person since the start of the pandemic, and it was, as it was this morning too, a joy to gather together. This fall, in religious education, a team of EREFians have come together to offer our whole lives, World of Wonder, Harry Potter and UU, middle school youth group and growing anti-racist UUs, high school youth group, a parents of preschoolers chalice circle, and coming of age for adults. We have asked our RE leaders to make personal commitments to racial equity and inclusion work, to their own spiritual practices, and to holy listening and honoring children here at EREF. In the coming year, these amazing religious education leaders will explore UU values, spirit, ethics, and will help reweave the interconnected web of community of which we are all a part. Dear religious education teachers, advisors, facilitators, interns, and mentors, we celebrate the love and energy you leaders offer the youngest members of EREF, and we bless your work. We commission you to honor the children, to teach them, and to nurture their religious and spiritual growth.
As a commissioning for this ministry, we lift up the words of Unitarian preacher William Ellery Channing in a responsive reading with you, the congregation. I invite everyone watching to join us in the reading, which will appear on your screen. Julia will begin the reading, and I will read the lines in italics. If you are an RE leader, please join Julia. Everyone else, please join me in the response.
The great end in religious instruction is not to stamp our minds upon the young, but to stir up their own.
Not to make them see with our eyes, but to look inquiringly and steadily with their own.
Not to give them a definite amount of knowledge, but to inspire a fervent love of truth.
Not to form an outward regularity, but to touch inward springs.
Not to bind them by ineradicable prejudices to our particular sect or peculiar notions,
but to prepare them for impartial, conscientious judging of whatever subjects may be offered to their decision.
Not to burden the memory, but to quicken and strengthen the power of thought.
Not to impose religion upon them in the form of arbitrary rules, but to awaken the conscience, the moral discernment.
In a word, the great end is to awaken the soul, to excite and cherish spiritual life. Religious education leaders, do you accept the responsibility to work towards these great ends in religious education? If so, please respond in our chat box, yes.
An Eno River Fellowship, do you covenant and commit to support the children, youth, and RE leaders towards the great ends in religious education? If so, please respond in the chat, yes.
Thank you all, RE leaders and EREF Fellowship, for your love and support in tending the spiritual lives of our children, youth, and families.
Gratitude and blessings. We have a fun and meaning-filled year ahead of us in RE. Today is also a Generosity Sunday, a day in which our offering goes to a nonprofit organization within the community that has been recommended by a member of ERUF. Today's collection will benefit Emancipate NC, whose work is aligned with our UU values of justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. Emancipate NC is working to dismantle structural racism and mass incarceration in North Carolina through means such as bail reform and abolishing youth confinement. Here to tell us about the important work of this organization is the Executive Director, Dawn Blagrove.
Good morning. My name is Attorney Dawn Blagrove, and I am the Executive Director of Emancipate NC. I'm here to thank you for selecting us to be your Generosity Sunday recipient. Emancipate NC is an organization that is committed to ending systemic and institutional racism and abolishing mass incarceration. We believe that the best way to do that is by empowering the people of the community to fight for the changes that they need. Now, make no mistake, we don't give the people the power because the people already have the power. What we do is help the people excavate the power that is latent. That power is sleeping in so many people and has been awakened over the last 2 years in America because of so many of the outrages that we've seen. So now that people are activated and ready to move, they need to know how. They need to know who holds the power to make the changes that they want to see. And that's where Emancipate NC comes in. Emancipate NC has organized a training called Vote for Justice that educates people about the roles, the responsibilities, duties, and powers of judges, district attorneys, sheriffs, and city council people. We believe that with this knowledge, people can go into their own communities on a local level and advocate for real change. Emancipate NC also stands with the people as we provide support for protesters. We organize and provide pro bono legal services for those people who are arrested while they are exercising their constitutional right to demand changes. And very often we show up where people need us when they need us. We work to create police accountability. And most importantly, we work to create a connection between the people and the power structures so that the people closest to the problem can talk to the people in power and tell them not what we want, but what they want. Emancipate NC is an organization that is totally committed to creating fair, equitable communities. The best way to do that is by changing hearts and minds. And the best people to do that are the people who already live in their communities, the people who are most deeply impacted by the harms of these systems. So again, Emancipate NC thanks you for believing in our work, for believing in the people, and for selecting us to be your Generosity Sunday recipients.
So we will give you instructions on how to give to Emancipate NC for our Generosity Sunday later in this service. United States Poet Laureate Joy Harjo writes, "Each human is complex, a complex, contradictory story. Some stories within us have been unfolding for years. Others are trembling with fresh life as they peek above the horizon. Each is a zigzag of emotional design and ancestral architecture. All the stories in the earth's mind are connected. Joy Harjo. It is with such stories in mind that today we celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day. The UUA website says that Indigenous Peoples Day reimagines Columbus Day and changes a celebration of colonialism into an opportunity to reveal historical truths about the genocide and oppression of Indigenous peoples in the Americas, to organize against current injustices, and to celebrate Indigenous resistance. The idea of replacing Columbus Day with Indigenous Peoples Day was born in 1977 at a UN-sponsored conference in Geneva, Switzerland, on discrimination against Indigenous populations in the Americas. 14 years later, activists in Berkeley, California, convinced the Berkeley City Council to declare October 12th a day of solidarity with Indigenous people. Henceforth, there has been a growing movement to appropriate Columbus Day as Indigenous Peoples Day. Many states have changed the holiday's name, including North Carolina. And so during this service, we are celebrating Indigenous people, and we do so with an object that is right near me, which, Jenny, can we show that on the screen? It is the presence. We are graced with the presence of Manzanita Tree, or by its native name, the Knik tree. The species is found in places around the world, but on these lands, mostly in the Pacific West, in which its fruit resembles small apples, which is what the Spanish name manzanita means. And they are eaten by our animal kin and cooked to this day, still to this day, by Native people. Also, throughout our service, we will offer the poetry and words of the current United States Poet Laureate, Joy Harjo, who is of the Mvskoke Creek Nation and the first Native person to be celebrated in this way. And finally, a word about language. We've learned through the writings of Indigenous activist and historian Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz that Indigenous individuals and people of North America on the whole do not consider the word Indian a slur. The language Indigenous, Indian, and Native are often used interchangeably. What all citizens of Native nations do prefer is that their nation's names in their own language be used, such as Dene for Navajo, or Anishinaabe for Ojibwe, and so on. So we begin our honoring of Indigenous people on this day with a reflection from Irafian Julia Marrone, who is of the Jaluggi, or Cherokee, heritage.
My mom raised my siblings and I with Indigenous traditions before I even knew that's what she was doing. Truly, it took moving away and living on my own to remember and realize just how big of a role the traditions played in my life and how the cultural consequences of the assimilation practices personally affected my mom. I am now proud to boast about my Cherokee lineage and my great-great-grandfather, Frank Wiley, that grew up on a Cherokee territory in Oklahoma, but this hasn't always been the case. When I was in elementary school, we were instructed to check out a book a week from our school library beginning in kindergarten, and it was our homework for the class to read the books by ourselves or with a parent's help. To differentiate instruction, certain kiddos were only allowed to select chapter books, and I was one of those students by first grade. At 6 years old, I checked out Dear America's Across the Wide and Lonesome Prairie, the Oregon Trail Diary of Hattie Campbell. This story wasn't necessarily intended to be hateful towards Indigenous people, but it also wasn't very nice. My mom cherishes our Cherokee lineage, even though we are now a few generations removed, and reading this book with her when I was just 6 years old was one of the most transformative and awakening experiences because she sat down with me chapter by chapter and explained just how bad the perceptions of Indigenous people were at the time of this story. My mom knew that the story that I would learn in school about Indigenous people was one of hatred, and she was determined to teach me the truth. When we got to passages such as, I made a friend, she is 14, 1 year older than I am, with freckles over her nose and cheeks and beautiful green eyes. She is not as bossy as Becky. Matter of fact, she seems real shy. But I think I shall like her very much anyhow. When I told her I am scared of Indians, she said, Don't worry, Hattie. There are probably plenty more good Indians than bad. My mom made sure to take a pause here. She asked me why anyone would ever be afraid of us just because we had freckles or dark eyes. Of course, I didn't know the answer, but she did. Growing up in a small conservative town right next to economically and racially diverse Atlantic City, New Jersey, meant that my childhood was riddled with structural racism. My entire family works in the service industry to support the wealthy travelers that make up our local economy. I worked in the service industry for 6 years myself, 3 of those before I graduated high school. We never fit in with the families of the children I went to school with that had lawyers, teachers, and police officers as their parents, but I was lucky that the children didn't know any better for the majority of my childhood. It wasn't until I was a teenager that they too began realizing that my family didn't fit their mold. But it was funny and ironic because even though they knew something was different, they still made it a point to tell me on a regular basis that I was too white to self-identify as Native American, even though I am still within the legal definition that would allow me to claim it with the tribe. Reconnecting with my own spirituality through my time at EREF, which is my first true spiritual home, has allowed me to reconnect with parts of myself that I haven't been able to express. People don't believe me when I tell them how much I can code switch on a daily basis, but my coworkers who are of color are well aware. The assimilation practices were aimed to eliminate an entire people by breeding out the bloodline or forcing white culture so intensely that our families lost themselves, their stories, and their traditions. I'm only just beginning, but I intend to ensure that I am not only relearning my rich culture that I was raised with, but also preserving it the best that I can with my own family. Thank you.
I invite you to join me in reflection, spoken meditation, and prayer. Hear these words of Joy Harjo. To pray, you open your whole self to sky, to earth, to sun, to moon, to one whole voice that is you. And know there is more that you can't see, can't hear, can't know except in moments steadily growing, and in languages that aren't always sound, but other circles of motion. Like Eagle, that Sunday morning over Salt River, circled in blue sky, in wind, swept our hearts clean with sacred wings. We see you, see ourselves, and know that we must take the utmost care and kindness in all things. Breathe in, knowing we are made of all this, and breathe. knowing we are truly blessed because we are born and die soon within a circle of true motion, like eagle rounding out the morning inside us. We pray that it will be done in beauty, in beauty. Let's pause for a few moments to hear what is circling within our own mind, our own heart. We are united this morning in love and spirit with all who suffer and mourn, with all who work for justice, with all who rejoice over life's beauty and blessings. May it ever be so. Amen.
I'm listening. I am listening. Spirit, speak to me. I'm listening. I am listening. Spirit, speak to me. My hands are wide open, eyes are wide open to see what I may be. I'm listening. I am listening. Spirit, speak to me. can hear the voices of all my kin singing, speaking, howling. We're all calling into the wind. My hands are wide open, and oh, the joy. Eyes are wide open. Oh, love to see that's here for you and me. Oh, in this moment of silence, I hear it speak to me.
Oh, I just love that song so much. It's so beautiful. And I also love fall. That's a transition. It's always been my favorite season for the golden beauty of the light and the bounty of the harvest. I actually love walking into grocery stores this time of year and seeing pumpkins piled high. And this year, the pumpkins have been absolutely wild looking. I know everyone is probably who knows me is probably tired of hearing me talk about these wild looking pumpkins, but they have been wild, at least to me. They have been green and yellow and white, and some are round, and some are actually quite flat. Some even have things growing on them that remind me of beards or warts or hair. I don't know why, but looking at them makes me laugh like a little kid. I even took pictures of them with my phone. I was so struck by them all. It feels as if I'm looking at some mystical, magical vegetable that popped out of a folk tale. And I'm also sure that if there are any farmers listening to me right now, they're probably thinking, that woman doesn't know squash. Pun intended. So today, I'm going to revisit some of what I shared with you last year because it is all so important and relevant to our collective understanding and journey of our relationship with our native kin. One of the unexpected gifts I discovered when I moved to North Carolina with my family 18 years ago was the beauty of the leaves changing this time of year. Another reason I love fall so much. When we lived in Brooklyn, I had grown accustomed to taking drives to New England or upstate New York to witness the gorgeous beauty of the leaves changing. And when we moved here, I assumed we were giving that up, only to discover with great delight that we had not. In fact, we did not need to drive for hours to see the leaves changing because we now lived amid their beauty. And so, about 18 years ago, my first autumn here, I was quite excited about celebrating our first Thanksgiving here for all of the reasons I just named: the beauty of the season and the delights of the harvest. And I also love preparing big family dinners. This was also my family's favorite holiday, even more so than Christmas or birthdays, because the primary gift you needed to bring at Thanksgiving was yourself and your appetite. As with many other families, ours was a gathering in which everyone participated in the meal preparations in some way. And we also have a ritual, which is my favorite part of everything. Right before our meal, we stand together in a large circle, and each person, young and old, take a brief moment to place into the circle a few words of thanks for something good that year, no matter how difficult the year had been for any one of us personally or for all of us collectively. And by way of example, last year was certainly one of those years of difficulty for many reasons. And after we ate, we all hang out in a food coma and watch whatever major sport was on television or a movie suited for all generations. So 18 years ago, I was in the throes of making preparations and imagining how wonderful this first Thanksgiving in North Carolina would be, when I suddenly received an email from a very creative young woman I knew who still lived in Brooklyn. Excited to hear from her, I opened the email to discover an image of the huge balloons of the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, covered by a big red circle with a diagonal slash running through it, the universal no symbol. The image was accompanied by an article about not celebrating Thanksgiving because it was a day of mourning for Native people in the United States. My jaw dropped open and I froze as I read the article. I then sighed deeply and sat back in my chair staring at the computer screen for a long moment, my mind spinning. I wish I could tell you that I called my family and canceled our Thanksgiving celebrations. I did not. What I knew is that our celebrations were an opportunity to be in gratitude for and with family. Over the years, our Thanksgiving holidays had become joyous hybrid affairs that often included immigrant in-laws and friends from Cuba and Belize, Jamaica, Trinidad, and Puerto Rico. None of us gave a thought to pilgrims or Indians, as this article accused. I hate to admit it, but I was annoyed with my young friend. What was she thinking, ruining my holiday by sending this to me just a couple of days before Thanksgiving? Why couldn't she have sent it several weeks before so that I could have had time to process it and figure out what to do? At least that's what I told myself. I shook my head and pushed the email and the thoughts it evoked to a corner of my mind, figuring I'd look into it later. And I went on with my plans. My family had a wonderful Thanksgiving gathering that first year in North Carolina, one that we still talk about today. And I must confess that no thought of the National Day of Mourning came to mind for me afterwards. Until the next year, when that same young friend sent me the same email again. I wasn't as annoyed this time, though I realized that I had not given a thought to what I now knew was a day of mourning for Indigenous people of the United States. I sat a little longer with the article this time and sifted through my thoughts. I suddenly realized that what I'd been taught in school about this holiday had been utterly ridiculous. And I then went on with my plans, thinking no more of this. Until the third year, when the same friend sent me the same article yet again. She was obviously trying to get my attention. I didn't hear from her at all during the rest of the year, only this article. I wanted to know what was up, so I finally gave her a call, and we spoke. She told me things that I simply did not know and had not ever considered. I hadn't thought about Native Americans, and that, she helped me to see, was a great part of the issue. They were invisible to me. I didn't see them, nor did I think about them, except in the most general way. Though at the point of first contact with Europeans, it is estimated that more than 15 million Indigenous people lived on the landmass we now call North America. However, by 1845, Unitarian Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote in his journal of a people who were generally viewed as defunct. He wrote, "We in Massachusetts see the Indians only as picturesque antiquity. Massachusetts, Shawmut, Samoset, Squantum, Nantasket, Narragansett, Assabet, Musketaquid. But where are the men?" And in 1867, historian Francis Parkman declared, "The Indians melted away not because civilization destroyed them, but because their own ferocity and intractable indolence made it impossible that they should exist in its presence." Wow. Millions of people supposedly melting away. When I read things like this, I always suspect there's got to be more to the story. Writer Gerald Visenor of Anishinaabe heritage and an enrolled member of the Minnesota Chippewa tribe White Earth Reservation tells us, "You can't understand the world without telling a story. There isn't any center to the world, but a story." And in his narrative, The Truth About Stories, Native writer Thomas King says, "The truth about stories is that that's all we are." But I find myself asking, and beloveds, I'm inviting you to also ask, whose story are we centering? During our brief time together this morning, I invite you to listen a little more deeply to several key aspects of a story of a particular sort, the myths of our origins as a nation, and how those myths have impacted our relations with Native people of the United States and our understanding of who they are, and by extension, who we are. Historian and longtime activist in the international indigenous movement, Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz writes, "Under the crust of the portion of earth called the United States of America, from California to the Gulf Stream waters, are interred the bones, villages, fields, and sacred objects of American Indians. They cry out for their stories to be heard through their descendants who carry the memories of how the country was founded and how it came to be as it is today." Dunbar Ortiz, author of An Indigenous People's History of the United States, suggests that we begin with the most essential story that any group of people holds about itself, its origin story. The story that a group of people share about how this all began, how the myth of how they came to be. And all groups of people have stories like this. For those of us who grew up and were educated here in the United States, the most familiar origin story begins in the 15th century, around 1492, when Christopher Columbus discovered America. Then in the early 17th century, when settlers arrived in Jamestown, Virginia, and a decade or two later, when the Pilgrims and Puritans arrived in Massachusetts. Some of you might recall Plymouth Rock from grade school history lessons and the harvest feasts we now know as Thanksgiving, shared between the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag people, though perhaps you, like I, only knew of this latter group as Indians because no one had mentioned that they were a specific group of people with a name. Embedded in these stories, which contain the myths of America's origins, are three ideas that are important for us to unpack because these seemingly benign foundational stories about settlers and colonists are fraught with devastating meaning. And we must listen more deeply to the embedded meanings they contain because they can guide us in an understanding of the unconscious meaning making we're enmeshed in today. First, undergirding these stories was a European law known as the Doctrine of Discovery, based on a 15th century papal bull that essentially said that indigenous inhabitants anywhere in the world lost their natural right to their land as soon as Europeans arrived and claimed it, specifically non-Christian lands. People's homelands were discovered by European foreigners, and the people were considered subjects of the Europeans and were expected to do what the discoverers wanted. If they resisted, they were to be conquered by European military action. In 1609, Mvskoke, leader of the Powhatan Confederacy, an alliance of 90 Algonquian-speaking tribes, asked John Smith, the English military leader of the Jamestown colony of Virginia, he asked, "Why should you take by force that from us which you can have by love? Why should you destroy us who have provided you with food? What can you get by war? What is the cause of your jealousy? You see us unarmed and willing to supply your wants. If you will come in a friendly manner and not with swords and guns as to invade an enemy." John Smith had threatened to kill all the women and children if the Powhatan leaders would not feed and clothe the settlers, as well as provide them with land and labor. You might recognize John Smith from the story of Pocahontas. Mvskoke was her father. While the English, the Pilgrims and Puritans, were not Catholics or subjects of the Pope, they believed they had a covenant with God which gave them, too, a right to subject people and take their land. Ultimately, Europeans believed that by virtue of being white and Christian, they were superior to the indigenous peoples they encountered anywhere in the world. Most of the non-European world was colonized under the Doctrine of Discovery from the mid-15th century well into the 20th century. Unbelievable, right? Dunbar Ortiz writes, Europeans and Euro-American discoverers had gained real property rights in the lands of indigenous people by merely planting a flag. She goes on to say the doctrine of discovery is so taken for granted that it is rarely mentioned in historical or legal texts published in the Americas. A second idea embedded in our stories is that of the settler. People who traveled from faraway Europe to make their home here. That sounds reasonable enough, making a home, perhaps fleeing persecution from somewhere. But as Dunbar Ortiz points out, the word settler means more than just a person who settles down to live in a new place. Throughout history, it has also meant a person who goes to live where supposedly no one has lived before. However, more often than not, settlers have gone to live somewhere that is already home to someone else. A third idea embedded in all of our stories is the notion of colonization. Implicit in the doctrine of discovery, colonization is all about taking political and economic control of a region. The colonizers are the people or institutions that are part of that process. whether it's the military, business interests, people who go there to live, and often representatives of religious institutions. This latter group should come as no surprise, since the doctrine of discovery was legitimized by Christian religious leaders. Dunbar Ortiz contends that because of their key role in establishing and populating a colony, settlers may also be called colonizers. The goal of settler colonialism is to take over all resources in a region, particularly the land. Settlers who came to what is currently known as North America wanted land for homes, farms, and businesses that most often they could not have in their home countries. So under their nation's flag, those Europeans fought Native people for control of that land. Settler colonialism was key to building the United States. And finally, embedded in these stories is the notion of manifest destiny, a term many of us did learn at one time or another in our American history classes. Manifest destiny is the belief that English-speaking white Americans were destined to spread their presence and their ideals across the entire North American continent. As with Europe and the Doctrine of Discovery, manifest destiny became the banner under which homelands of indigenous peoples would be overtaken by the United States government. Let us take a pause and a deep breath. Whether it is the doctrine of discovery, manifest destiny, settlers, or colonists, a few moments of deep listening and critical thinking begins to dislodge the origin myths as we've come to know them. And for the social scientists among us, there is also the notion of civilization itself, and who decides what civilization is and how such definitions shape what we think about societies and the people in them. As we listen more deeply, we have an opportunity to see indigenous people, indigenous kin, with new eyes, to reflect upon their story as they know it. Today in the United States, there are more than 500 federally recognized indigenous nations composed of nearly 3 million people, the descendants of the 15 million original inhabitants of these lands. Dunbar Ortiz reminds us that these people carry memories and stories of their own about how the United States came to be the nation we know today. It is necessary that Americans learn to think more completely and more critically about their own history, because it can help them be better citizens of the world, she writes. I was pleased to learn that in 2012, the United States, the UUA General Assembly passed a resolution repudiating the Doctrine of Discovery and calling for the full implementation of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. You can find information about this on Revs' website under the news section dated April 21st, 2020, on which we also acknowledge the unceded ancestral native land that we currently inhabit. So my young friend no longer sends me the day of mourning email, as I came to regard it. She succeeded in making me more aware of how certain American myths are alive in me also. And so I'm committed to dismantling these myths within myself. My family and I still celebrate a time of gratitude and Thanksgiving together on the last Thursday in November, but I now hold it in a new context and with conscious respect that it is also a day of great sorrow and mourning among Indigenous people of this land. May we all do the same. Amen, Ashe, and blessed be. Earlier, we heard about the good work of Emancipate NC, and this morning, all contributions in excess of our regular pledges will be given to Emancipate NC as our Generosity Sunday offering. You may give using the link in the chat box or go to eruf.org and use the Give button at the top of your screen, which will guide you to our giving portal. We continue now with the offertory by Kate Lewis. We give thanks for the gifts of beloved community and the gift of opening our hearts and our awareness as we come to know the truth of our collective story, which will hopefully lead us into a restored relationship with one another. Our closing words this morning are by Joy Harjo, one of my favorite poems that she's written. It's called Remember. And she writes, "Remember the sky you were born under. Know each of the stars' stories. Remember the moon. Know who she is. Remember the sun's birth at dawn, that it is the strongest point of time. Remember sundown and the giving away tonight. Remember your birth, how your mother struggled to give you form and breath. You are evidence of her life and her mother's and hers. Remember your father. He is your life also. Remember the earth whose skin you are. Red earth, black earth, yellow earth, white earth, brown earth. We are earth. Remember the plants, trees, animal life, who all have their tribes, their families, their histories too. Talk to them. Listen to them. They are alive poems. Remember the wind. Remember her voice. She knows the origin of the universe. Remember, you are all people, and all people are you. Remember, you are this universe, and this universe is you. Remember, all is in motion, is growing, is you. Remember, language comes from this. Remember, the dance language is that life is. Remember. Go in peace, go in love, and may we all remember.